Thanks. Good afternoon. So my name is Ashley, and alongside Sophia, Harriet, and Kieran, we're going to discuss why we believe that the public sector has the most important role in driving climate action. We will discuss three key areas relating to climate action, which include promoting awareness around the public sector, the policies and legislation relating to climate action, and investment opportunities within the public sector. I'm briefly going to discuss how the public sector have a vital role to play in raising awareness about climate issues, and with having less transparency, that they need to be the ones who drive climate action in the UK. Firstly, the public sector has an important leadership role in driving mitigation against climate change impact. They can act as a catalyst and an advocate for ambitious climate action plans across all sectors, including building, transport, wastewater, and energy. And by doing this, set an example to the public on best practices, as well as getting the private sector on board. And also, as a large purchaser of goods and services, the promotion of green procurement practices is important to incentivize more sustainable product lines and supply chains. As public companies are a lot more visible to the population, they're the ones who are promoting sustainable behaviours to the population, both on an individual and collective scale. There are many mechanisms in which they do this, predominantly through the use of educational tools for schools and communities. My background is in the water industry, and from my research for this across public water companies in the UK, I found that all have developed educational tools and resources aimed at raising awareness on water use and how climate change can affect this. For example, Scottish Water have launched a new online education hub to engage with young learners. Welsh Water have secondment opportunities for teachers to work in their education team to deliver educational provisions to schools across Wales. And then Translink, who is a transport body, they have developed action plans to encourage people to use sustainable methods of transport to assist in meeting climate goals. As well as education resources, the public sector, they also use campaigns and public outreach initiatives to inform the public about climate change impacts, mitigation strategies, and the importance of climate action. The Northern Ireland Water have a 1 million trees campaign, which is to deliver large-scale planting across Northern Ireland. And this encourages not only schools and communities to get involved, but also encourages the private sector teams to assist with these projects. As the public sector have less transparency than the private sectors to the community, it is important for them to be seen to be driving climate action in their projects. They can often face scrutiny from community-led stakeholder groups and therefore have more accountability than the private sectors when it comes to ensuring sustainable methods are used that work for the environment, the community, and the economy. And my final point is on the introduction of the social value model. For anyone who's not aware, social value is a broader understanding of value, moving beyond using money as the main indicator, but instead putting emphasis, engaging people to understand the impact of decisions on their lives. The promotion of social value concepts by public companies is just another example of how these public organisations are promoting different methods to enhance climate action. Social value is a relatively new concept that the public sector companies are now including in their procurement lifecycle. It mandates that 10% of evaluation weighting in tenders must go towards social value. And under the policy, there's a theme for delivering zero carbon, with indicators such as assessing and minimising embodied carbon. So in practice, this means that any bidders have to suggest activities which could be delivered as part of the contract. These could be activities related to climate action, for example, by creating carbon management plans or environmental volunteering. So by including this social value model, it is ensuring that all future projects will advocate for climate action and set an example for others to do the same. So in conclusion, it's clear to see that the public sector really do take on this leadership role in driving climate action by acting as the advocate for climate action and encouraging best practices and providing support and knowledge to the population. So next, Sophia Harriet will discuss the policies and legislation relating to the public sector in climate action.
Thank you, Ashley. So as Ashley has demonstrated, the public sector is the planner and regulator of change and almost leading the way in driving climate action. I believe there hasn't been a more important time for public sector leadership on climate change. So if we start with the overarching legislation, which underpins the UK's commitment to addressing climate change, which is the Climate Change Act of 2008. And this is the world's first legally binding national commitment to cutting greenhouse gas emissions. So through the Act, a target was originally set for an 80% reduction in emissions by 2050. However, in 2019, the UK declared a climate emergency and amended the target to legislate a 100% reduction in emissions by 2050, which is commonly known as net zero. And this is the recognised target that this country is now working towards to tackle climate change. And it's actually the first country or economy in the world to put a law in place to contribute to addressing climate change. So I believe that tackling the impacts of climate change is not just an environmental issue, but it's about the long-term security and resilience of communities for both public and private sector organisations to act upon. But it is for the public sector to kind of map that path and set the records for that. So I see the public sector as adopting climate change as a strategic risk, setting the agenda and almost enforcing legislation for private organisations and society to follow. The public sector is encouraging private sectors to almost alter their ethos and change their ways of working and think more strategically about their net zero targets. We've been seeing this a lot recently, as many corporations are now starting to share their net zero strategies publicly and become more kind of open and honest about their commitments. So a key driver for climate action in the energy sector is the Energy Company Obligation Scheme, where energy suppliers are now helping households reduce the cost of heating through energy saving measures. So this is a government-led scheme to help energy companies get a handle on climate reduction, carbon reduction and kind of energy efficiency, especially for those kind of low-income households. So without government frameworks in place, I don't think we will be in a position that we are in today, as there wouldn't be as much kind of drive and urgency to tackle the climate issue. So if we think about the water and environment sector specifically, there is planning legislation and local policies in place to kind of grapple with climate change and in turn influence whether developments can go ahead. So the planning system has embraced sustainability and climate resilience quite early on, especially through the National Planning Policy Framework. And local planning authorities also have a statutory duty to include this in their local plans and ensure that development mitigates and adapts to climate change. So implementing changes to the way in which developments are built and used is fundamental to achieving the government's net zero target. And a great example of this is the recent Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act, which has just been implemented by the government. And this means that sustainable drainage systems, or commonly known as SUDs, will now be mandatory for all housing developments in England from 2024. So this has been a huge breakthrough in our industry, and that is an example of public sector-led solutions for managing climate change impacts. So kind of rising urbanisation, a growing population and more intense weather patterns are driven by climate change are causing our traditional sewer systems to become overwhelmed. And without more effective and holistic water management approaches like the mandatory SUDs, flooding events from surface water would continue to kind of cause more adverse effects. So unfortunately, for the last 12 years, sustainable drainage systems have only been compulsory on schemes with more than 10 dwellings. So for individual houses being built, there hasn't been any formal requirement for developers or kind of architects to implement SUDs with their design. And it's only now that the government have mandated its provision that we will see more positive change within the building and the planning sector. So as we can see here, there is a clear correlation between legislation and climate action. And we all know that the overarching Climate Change Act has a huge role to play in the urgency and readiness for the UK's response to climate change. The public sector is recognising that there is a need to kind of accelerate the green transition. However, creating new pathways will require long-term commitment, increased investment and collaboration between government organisations, the public sector and society. So I now pass you over to Kieran, who's going to demonstrate how kind of strategic investment is really important for the public sector. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sophia Harry, and apologise for the technical difficulties I experienced earlier on the call. My arguments in this debate today will focus on the ideologies, practicalities, and most importantly, the opportunities of climate investment in the public sector. A fundamental contrast between these two systems, which is worth bearing in mind throughout the debate today, is that in almost all cases, the private sector is primarily driven by profit, while the public sector provides services principally aimed at societal benefit. The broader argument of public versus private sector is very topical. Though some people can often dismiss the ideology of public ownership and the effectiveness of the public sector in our society, these are undoubtedly topics of increasing relevance in the UK today. Industries such as water, rail, and energy, which are also critical to our transition to net zero, as well as our resilience to embedded climate change, are regularly referenced in conversations comparing nationalisation and privatisation, showing that there is clearly an appetite for this debate in at least some of the UK population. This afternoon, I want to spend a bit of time digging into the practicalities of this debate, particularly when it comes to investment. Apart from not-for-profits, the private sector companies generally have to create revenue year on year to ensure they are able to pay their taxes, compensate their employees, and invest in their business. The profit generated at the end of this process should not be demonized. It is simply necessary for these companies to survive and thrive. However, profit being the primary driver means that by definition, investments in climate and biodiversity-focused initiatives must be at best a secondary consideration, an add-on, and something which to many companies is a luxury rather than a necessity. On the other side of this coin, we have the public sector, which can have more flexibility to invest in climate-focused policies. Despite having outgoings in other governmental departments, an ambitious administration with a long-term plan can focus its investment on decarbonising energy production, restructuring public transport, and increasing the climate resilience of the country with regard to food, infrastructure, and health. Policies such as these are known to be beneficial to the economy, society, and the environment in the long term, but are often hampered by short-term budget constraints. However, there is a key mechanism that the public sector, particularly at central government level, has, which is at least less accessible to the private sector, and which could be essential to significant climate action. This is the ability to borrow for long-term climate investment. These levers are clearly already being used, with recent numbers from the Climate Policy Initiative indicating that on a global scale, public sector climate financing is growing at almost double the rate of the private sector. The obvious rebuttal to this is that even if you forecast a long-term financial benefit to your green investments, for countries such as the UK with a relatively high debt to GDP ratio, there is a limit to how much the markets will allow you to borrow at any one time, as we saw this past autumn. This leads me on to my substantive argument in this debate, which is that while the public sector cannot solve this problem on its own, it can take a leading role. In the UK, as in many other countries, the private sector dominates the economy, with less than 20% of workers in the UK being employed by the state, something which broadly corresponds with general economic activity. The question then arises, how can we mobilise this substantial part of the economy to engage in game-changing climate action? The answer to this question is strategic and committed green industrial strategy driven by the public sector. Government departments and public sector bodies can influence the direction of the domestic economy by setting clear and binding long-term policies and frameworks. This means learning lessons from past mistakes, such as the slashing of solar panel subsidies, the dragging of our feet on nuclear, and the back and forth policy changes on onshore wind, all of which have occurred in the last decade or more. The most recent example of this is the collapse of Britishvolt, an electric battery company previously touted to be the jewel in Britain's manufacturing crown, which went under due to a lack of public investment to assist with initial capital costs. Although these examples may paint a disheartening picture, they demonstrate a very important point, which is that the public sector is essential in galvanizing green investment. By establishing a new model of long-term climate investment through a bold and green industrial strategy, government departments can give long-term certainty to private providers of these services, ranging from solar panel fitters and insulation specialists and contracting firms, all the way down to engineering students deciding whether to study modules on nuclear and renewable energy while at university. This certainty and vision can also assist in mobilizing private finance through climate and biodiversity focused investment funds, utilizing the emerging expertise in blended financing. Whether it be in awareness raising, policy interventions, or strategic investment, there are clearly roles for both the public and private sectors. In our view, these roles are clear. The public sector takes the lead and the private sector follows. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you all very much. It was already 76-24. That was a very compelling set of arguments. So very well prepared, excellent executed. Thank you ever so much. So we will move on straight away to panel 2, who I don't think I have to tell you have your work cut out, but Sian, Sophie, and Alex are now going to convince us that in fact it is the private sector that has the most important role in driving climate action. Guys, over to you.
Thank you, Adam. So today, myself, Sophie and Alex are going to argue that the private sector has the most important role in driving climate action. The private sector is in fact a catalyst for this climate action, and the private sector does have a mostly commercial focus. This focus itself drives research and development, funding allocation, resource allocation, innovation, and collaboration. The first area we are going to cover today will look at the reduced constraints that the private sector faces in comparison to the public sector. This will then be followed by Sophie discussing the private sector solution focus, and then Alex will cover innovation. So there is no question that we are reliant on the government's past legislation or produce best practice documentation. However, the speed to implement this legislation and the race to net zero is often not quick enough, especially when tackling such a time-sensitive issue such as climate change. And this legislation is then often implemented by the private sector themselves, not to mention the influence of the private sector in supporting and in some instances driving the creation of legislation and best practice. So one example of this best practice would be the Construction Playbook, a document that details best practice for the construction sector, written in conjunction with the private sector, and highlights the importance of incorporating environmental sustainability throughout the process. So in this example, the private sector plays a key role in driving best practice and therefore climate action. Given the commercial focus that I've already mentioned, the private sector often has a more flexible approach to process. So whilst the private sector will still have processes and governance the same as the public sector, these are more likely to be regularly reviewed and updated to drive efficiencies in time and money, and to be able to fund and move forward with important projects that will tackle climate action. This is likely to also include flexibility to incorporate climate action in processes and business as usual. A report from PwC in 2018 highlights that over 70% of private companies mention sustainable development goals in their annual reporting, a figure that I'm sure has increased since, and I would hope that has increased since too. So the funding process is also a perfect example of the reduced constraints that the private sector faces. Funding is necessary to deliver climate action, and given the scale of the issue, considerable investment is required. Innovative solutions, which may include mitigation and adaptation when addressing climate action, are often yet to be tested and are coupled with high upfront costs. In the public sector, projects such as these may be dismissed or require significant additional time to bolster a business case to receive the funding required to press on. The prescriptive nature of business cases and a risk-averse attitude in many cases results in less and slower investment. Instead, prescriptive funding pots for innovation are often identified, sometimes later than required, and with too little money available for the effective delivery of projects that drive this climate action. So this can be found within the flood and coastal sector. So for example, there is the Flood and Coastal Resilience Innovation Programme, or FCRIP, which is a brilliant project, but is too late and with too little funding in many people's opinions. On the other hand, the private sector organisations have greater flexibility around the allocation of funding to innovative projects, and they are more used to carrying risk. This approach to risk allows for investment in the perceived unknown and drives the innovation and solutions required to take this climate action. Alex is going to go and cover innovations in a bit more detail later. According to the European Union, already close to 75% of global climate finance flows come from the private sector. Projects within the private sector are often better able to secure the funding necessary at the time they need it to drive the innovation that we require for climate action. It is the funding available in the private sector that at this moment in time needs to be harnessed. The final constraint I would like to highlight is the impact of political cycles and influence. Although personal changes do also occur within private organisations, and many do have executive boards to answer to, the political influence is considerably smaller in comparison. It is also insulated from electoral pressures. According to research completed by the IMF, most government investment is at the beginning of its term. When elections are close, policymakers spend on visible and immediate benefits instead of large amounts of public investment. Therefore, the political support and investment into climate action is likely to vary throughout these terms and be highly uncertain, when what we need is certainty and an increase in investment. In summary, the private sector has the most important role in driving climate action as a result of the reduced constraints it faces in comparison to the public sector. This in turn provides the opportunities to continue driving climate action in the years to come. I will now pass on to Sophie, who will cover the private sector solutions focus.
Thanks, Sian. So in terms of climate action, the solutions focus means that the private sector is innately geared around delivering specific products and services with clear outcomes. We propose that this results in the most pragmatic, scalable approach to climate action. So the benefits of this approach include efficiency. The private sector needs to demonstrate value for money and returns on investment. So that requires minimizing time spent, minimizing cost, and maximizing the outcomes. So in the climate action context, say the project was a large urban tree planting scheme, it would need to demonstrate improved air quality and reduced temperatures as the metrics for success. So the client would want to see maximum output on those as quickly as possible and at the lowest cost. It's balancing those competing outcomes that results in efficiencies. The private sector's huge and growing involvement in climate action has the potential to unlock a huge source of funding directed towards investing in nature, instead of relying on government schemes alone. Again, with that solutions focus hat on, this is surely the most pragmatic approach to delivering climate actions at scale. The private sector might actually be motivated to move faster than the public sector on climate action. This is because businesses are often motivated by their own environmental, social, and governance goals, rather than simply acting within the requirements set by legislation and policy in the public sector. Businesses will actively compete with each other on ESG goals against their competitors in order to win work. And that motivates investment in climate action. For example, developers have already been striving for 10% biodiversity net gain on developments, even though the environment bill that mandates this will not be coming into law until November of this year. Again, this is surely one of the most practical ways to motivate investment and more ambitious targets for climate action, rather than relying on regulation from the public sector alone. So there's many examples of this solutions focused approach in the private sector, but I'd like to draw your attention to environmental market operators. Environmental market operators include companies such as the Environment Bank that facilitate a financial market for the ecosystem services provided by nature and natural processes. Credits include products such as biodiversity credits, which are traded and used to fund habitat management interventions such as wetland creation. Historically, much of the habitat management in the UK has largely been funded through government schemes and charities, but we only need to look to recent news coverage of the government's forthcoming environmental land management schemes to understand that traditional funding streams are insufficient to meet the huge challenge of the climate crisis alone. Environmental markets unlock larger sources of funding that can be secured over the long term. This combats the issue of election cycles highlighted by Sian. Environmental markets have been valued at $5 billion per year, and this is only set to grow. Obviously, this is brilliant news because this is the only way we are going to be able to deliver climate action solutions at scale. Yeah, handing on to Alex to discuss innovation.
Thank you very much, Sophie. So innovation is the backbone to private sector driving climate action. Now, the definition of innovation is to make changes to something that's already established, especially by introducing new methods, ideas, or products. Now, to expand on that, the private sector is characterized by an entrepreneurial spirit and a culture of innovation. So this allows for quick adaptation to changing market dynamics and emerging opportunities. This agility enables companies to respond rapidly to climate challenges and develop innovative solutions to mitigate environmental impacts. So this leads to market-driven solutions. The private sector operates in a competitive market environment, as we've alluded to before. So this is driven by consumer demand and profitability. This dynamic encourages companies to develop and commercialize climate-friendly products and services that cater to the evolving needs and preferences of environmentally conscious clients, such as the public sector. Now, for innovation to happen, we need technological advancements, and the private sector has a track record of driving innovation and technological advancements. This expertise can be leveraged to develop and implement breakthrough technologies that address climate change challenges more efficiently, and therefore put the private sector in the driving seat for climate action. A benefit for this is that the private sector companies have the financial resources and incentives to invest heavily in research and development. This is crucial for the exploration and creation of innovative solutions. For example, renewable energy technologies, energy efficient systems, carbon capture, and sustainable transport options. Now, the crux of this innovative solutions focus is that these solutions need to be scalable and deployable. There's no use having innovative ideas that only stay in the laboratory or in offices. They need to get on the ground and reach as many people as possible for us to tackle the climate crisis. So the private sector possesses the capacity to scale up these innovations and deploy them on a large scale. So this could look like investment in infrastructure, production facilities, and distribution networks required for widespread adoption of climate-friendly technologies, so cutting across the whole food chain of these solutions. This would obviously accelerate the transition to a lower carbon economy. Now, for some examples of innovation, how it works and its advantages within the private sector, the most obvious example that I could think of was looking at Tesla and Elon Musk. Now, Tesla introduced a variety of high-performance electric vehicles with long-range capabilities, which accelerated the adoption of EVs because they produced other automakers to invest in EV technology. So therefore, there was a commercial carrot that therefore reignited the other companies in the sector to react. And that gave greater acceleration for us seeing more electric vehicles on the road today. Tesla also took this technology further, innovated further, and recombined these ideas to produce other technologies such as the Tesla Powerwall, which can be used for home energy storage of renewable electricity during outside of peak times of renewable generation. Now, another good example of this, which is a bit closer to the water and environmental sector, is private sector innovations such as leak detection technology, for example, CIWEM. So CIWEM is an acoustic solution that gives condition data of pipelines. You can integrate it with other high-performing data to provide a more holistic view of network management. So this private sector innovation allows for the conservation of resources, reducing emissions and enhancing safety for this non-invasive and non-destructive option for looking at pipeline assessments. So this can be applied to a variety of industries and is crucial for achieving sustainability goals of both private and public sector organizations. It'll also mitigate climate change and ensure that responsible management of resources and infrastructure. And my final example of private sector innovation is from a company called Reckley. Now, Reckley produce concrete molds that can be used for in situ or precast concrete units that are often used for the construction of seawalls to combat flood and coastal erosion. Now, the texture on these seawalls provides a habitat for intertidal organisms to inhabit, which is great for biodiversity. It provides an ecological function to an otherwise dead wall. It's more aesthetically pleasing and ensures longer durability of the asset. Now, this could only be achieved by the private sector investing in the technology required to deliver these molds that sit inside the formwork of concrete and the releases required to give a good finish to get these habitat niches. So in conclusion, climate action at scale is needed with a long-term perspective. We need a solutions focus that can only thrive from a commercial framework found in the private sector. Innovation will provide the breadth and depth of ideas required. We need sustainable and scalable solutions provided by the private sector to meet the magnitude of the climate challenge in front of us. We need climate action now, and there's no time to lose. Thank you very much for listening.
Fantastic. Thank you, both teams. Private sector, a very good job in countering the voting in the first panel. So we can go to the next slide now, please, Chloe. We have 5 or 6 minutes for some Q&A before we revisit the vote. And so thank you. It looks like we've had some technical issues with the Q&A in Slido, in Zoom. So thank you to everybody that's put their questions into Slido. I'm going to work off those for now. So first one, I'm going with the one that's been most upvoted, and it's for our public sector team. I'll come back to the next one, to the private sector. So the question came in: if we don't have a government, the comment, and there's a question in here, if we don't have a government that's legitimately invested in addressing climate change, the trickle-down ability of public sectors, and I think private sectors, is diminished and restrained. So what's your view on, obviously you've made the case, and there were early voting, that the public sector has the most important role. If they're not getting the direction from the top, they're not actually able to deliver on that. So just thoughts on what that actually means. Kieran.
Yeah, thanks, Adam, and thanks to whoever posted the question. Yeah, I guess this is an interesting point, and something which I covered briefly in my section of the debate, which was around, that there have been examples where perhaps we may not be happy with the sort of top-down direction. And that I think I went into a few examples. So like solar panel subsidies is a great example, but I think that doesn't necessarily diminish the importance of the public sector or government direction on climate action. I think if anything, it emphasizes it even more, because we see this reliance on the private sector being led by the sort of top-down government initiatives. So I think definitely it emphasizes that importance. And I think on the specific of your question, yeah, this might be something we see change in the future, when governments do inevitably take climate change more and more seriously. But I suppose we can only hope that happens sooner rather than later.
Yeah, absolutely, Kieran. Great point. Thank you. Anybody else want to add anything to that, or I'll move on to the next one? That's a great answer. So the next one, I'll take the next highest votes in Slido. This is for the private sector team. So I think you in part addressed this in the presentation comments, but it's a very good question. What is, in your opinion, the impetus or motivation for the private sector companies to place their profits and stakeholders behind climate action? What's their motivation?
I'm happy to maybe take a bit of this one, because I covered it in my slide. So I talked a bit around environmental, social and governance goals. I think for businesses, this is one of the major ones, because you're a lot more likely to win work over other companies if you can demonstrate, a real active push towards achieving sustainable business targets. And And you can't get away with greenwashing these days because so many other companies are doing it. You need to show a real concerted effort that can be measured and demonstrated. So I think again, this really leans into how those commercial drivers can actually result in benefits for climate action.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you. Right, kind of very much linked through to that, and a question which has flown up through the ratings. So on the private sector side, again, can we really position Tesla, Elon Musk, as a superior example on climate action, given issues such as lithium mining, emerald mining, pollution, space exploration, and such like, defunding public transport? What's your view on how we can position? Well, obviously, we mentioned Tesla in the opening comments. Anyone who want to pick up on Tesla and their like, I guess. Sian.
Yeah, I was waiting for Alex, but I think the point that was made in the presentation is that it's the private sector that has the money to innovate, and I don't think necessarily Elon Musk and Tesla are up there with being they're not great with climate action, but I think the point comes back to, if we have those people with the money and those organizations with the money, they can go further with what they can do. They can go further with the innovation. They can go further with the products that we need to actually make a difference. I don't know if Alex, you want to pick up on that, because I know you did. It's the innovations in the products more than anything.
Yeah, I agree that the Elon Musk example might not be the best for climate action, but it's clearly a very good example of how innovation can take place in the private sector and be driven by market changes in the appetite for that sort of thing. So that applying that to the environmental sector, there's clearly an appetite for environmental solutions, and therefore if the money is in the right hands, then the innovation can take place to provide those solutions. And I take your point that Tesla, there's a lot of other bits and bobs going on with battery mining and all the rest of it, but as it's a relatively new technology on a large scale, I'm sure that'll get better. But I think that's probably besides the point of this argument.
Excellent, Alex, thank you. I'm going to ask one last question of our public sector team. We're going to run out of time shortly. Then I'm going to drop this on you, come to Sophia Hari and Alex, back to you for a closing pitch before we go to the next vote. So what do you guys think on that? So final question, does the public sector have enough money? They often have budget constraints and are not investing into climate action. So question for the public sector team.
I think a lot of this comes down to kind of legislation, and we know that we have the Climate Change Act in place, and this has led to a lot of kind of policies and other legislations, even within the kind of flood and water management sector. So I think there are constraints around budget, but I think if we can enforce kind of legislation, then that really does kind of help. Even mentioned earlier with kind of planning policies in place, and even kind of updating the national planning policy framework. We've got the 25-year environment plan. So I feel like even though the public sector has constraints around funding, we can use kind of frameworks like these to really kind of adapt and mitigate to climate change, even kind of within the environment sector. Interesting to hear the position for that from the private side.
And just to elaborate on that point, maybe Sophia Hari as well, I think there's a key aspect of this, which is that the public sector has the ability to unlock private finance, and I think that's a really key aspect of this, is that an acknowledgement that yes, we don't have endless amounts of money, but there is a lot more money in the private part of the economy that can be unlocked through climate and nature focused investment funds and different things like that, blended financing. So definitely worth the person asking the question to look into those, because they're a really exciting development in securing additional finance.
Great, thank you both. And look, we're right up on time, so Sophia, Harry and Alex, I'll spare you the closing comment. We will jump straight to the next slide and our closing Slido, please. So, good grief. One vote, okay, all right, it's not quite as bad as it looks, private team. Please do vote. Have your views been changed at all? Two excellent panels giving really compelling arguments. There are clearly opportunities and significant constraints on both sides. We had 50+ votes last time. I'll give it a moment. We're up at 27. Let's see if we can get back closer to the number of folks that voted previously. We've pretty much got a full house. We've had a great turnout today, over 150, 160 people on the call. So thank you. Give it a moment or two. It is looking like we're scoring a draw. I think we were 76% for public sector, 24% for private sector on your first flush. Private sector have maybe nudged it up slightly. So a marginal win for private sector, if you can call 73-27 a win. We will wrap it up there. Thank you ever so much to all of you. We've kind of come out balanced. We know it takes everybody to do this. We've got significant challenges to address climate change. It is going to take absolutely all of us, private, public, and individuals, and everybody in between as well. So particularly thank you to our panelists for those excellent presentations, for your questions, bearing with us and using Slido. Thank you very much for that. Particularly to the CIWEM Early Careers Network and to the Climate Change Specialist panel as well for organising the event. We hope you found the discussion informative. Lots of great discussion, comments and points made, so please do follow up on any of those. We will be running further provocation events hosted by the Early Careers Network on a variety of climate-related topics. The next theme will be, did COP27 represent a step forward or step backward in the fight against climate change? So a great question. If you are an early career professional and interested in participating, speaking at that next event or any others, please get in touch with Chloe Good, and Chloe's contact details should be in the chat. You can sign up for upcoming events and past recordings at the links that we've already provided. And so with that, I just want to say thank you all for attending today, to our panelists for everything that they've done and all the work they've put in, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.